tell you once we are live. We are live, Shana. So, Shana, welcome to the channel. I've not been doing interviews for the past 1.5 years, and because I felt a strong calling to do commentary videos, as you would have seen on Instagram and other platforms. And I told God, if you want me to do an interview, it has to happen out of the blue. So then, out of the blue, both of us got in touch, and now we are doing the interview. So before we start, I just want you to give a brief introduction about yourself before you share your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Krishana. I go by Shana, so most people know me as Shana. My husband and I live in the Great North Woods in New Hampshire.
Mm.
We actually met in California. I'll probably dive into that a little bit more later. I'm a mom of 2 boys and a third boy on the way. So we're very excited about that. And in terms of work, I am a communications and creative strategist. So I help a lot of startups and smaller companies figure out what their story is. And so that's what I do for work. But really, I think my full-time job right now and the thing that is most important to me in my life is raising my kids. So that has become very central to my life and is the most important thing.
Mm. And so you grew up in Malaysia in a Hindu family.
Yep.
So could you
Yep.
share a little bit about what was the formation that you received as a Hindu, and how did you
Yeah.
practice your faith as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up Hindu in Malaysia was not particularly different or unique per se. There are over 2 million Hindu Indians in Malaysia, and
Oh,
it's a
okay.
very widely practiced and accepted religion. And
Mm.
so, although Malaysia is a primarily Muslim country,
Mm.
there was no shortage of Hindu influence in my life and in society. Lots of Hindu temples. I went to school with a lot of, Hindu folks or other Hindu folks. Both my parents grew up in Hindu families, although my dad always took issue with the ritualistic nature of Hinduism, and he is agnostic. So
Mm.
until the age of 10, I actually grew up relatively secular because of
Mm.
this. There
Mm.
was little religious influence in my life until my parents got divorced in 2001. Until
Oh.
then, my only real exposure to the faith was a very small altar that my mom had tucked away in our guest room closet where she would say her morning prayers.
Mm.
And Diwali Day, which is the largest Hindu festival of the year, our family would go to a Hindu temple. We would visit
Mm.
with my grandparents and with our cousins, and there was always some kind of Hindu prayer or blessing that was done on that day. So that was largely my exposure until age 10.
Mm.
Um, but after my parents got a divorce in 2001, Hinduism became a much more prominent and influential part of my life. And I think this is because my mom steeped herself very deeply in the faith that she had grown up in. And so the influence of Hinduism, and in particular, the influence of the Indian guru Satya Sai Baba, became a very central part of our lives. And just to give people a little background of the concept, in India, there's this concept of avatars or god men. So it's a very common precept in Hindu ideology, God
Mm.
incarnating as a man generation after generation. And Satya Sai Baba is believed to be one of these men.
Mm.
He is very, very influential. I would say he's the most influential Hindu god man. Um, and he has over 55 million devotees worldwide. My
Mm.
maternal grandparents were very ardent devotees of Satya Sai Baba. They became devotees after he purportedly cured my grandfather of tuberculosis. I take issue with the story. But in the early 1970s, this supposedly happened, and my mom was a young child. I think she was about 7 years old. And that's when her faith formation in Satya Sai Baba began.
Mm.
They think of these supernatural experiences as miracles, and these are stories that were passed down to me, particularly after my parents got divorced. So I became very, very heavily steeped not only in Hinduism, and I think it's important that we talk about Satya Sai Baba because that is the organization in which my faith was really formed. After the age of 10, we had pictures of him in the house. We went to a Satya Sai Baba center every Tuesday, rain or shine, it didn't matter. and we did what were called bhajans, which is a form of song worship. So we prayed to this man as God, and the best way I can describe it now, being on the outside, is that it's a cult. On the surface, there was nothing particularly evil about his teachings. He primarily preached what he called the 5 human values: love, truth, peace, righteousness, and nonviolence. And this was the basis for most of his seemingly innocuous teachings. He also preached that all religions were equally valid paths to the same God, him being the God he was referring to. And that general concept, I think, isn't unfamiliar to most Hindus who believe the same thing. Most Hindus do believe that all religions are a valid path to the same God.
Mm.
But these teachings underscored other ideas that will be important to later parts of our conversation, and one of those things was vegetarianism. He was a militant vegetarian who taught that meat eating was a form of violence. Anybody who ate meat was no better than a demon. These were his literal words. And this is something that influenced my worldview at a very young age, particularly as a teenager. So although I had eaten meat and it was a fairly regular part of my life before my parents' divorce, when I was 14 years old, I decided to be vegetarian because of this brainwashing, because I felt like it was a form of violence, because I was being told that it was no better than, something that a demon would do. And so this is just one of the many lies that were veiled under this umbrella of what he called the 5 human values. And although my dad is agnostic and had his objections and skepticisms my whole life and expressed them, he believes that everyone will come to their own conclusions through their reason. That is something that he's always kind of said. Everybody will come to their own conclusions about what they believe. And so he never really interfered in my religious life. And I guess he figured eventually I'd grow up and make my own decisions about what I believe. And perhaps he was right, only it took me until I was 34 years old to get there. Because the brainwashing when you're in a cult, it runs very deep. And unfortunately, I think that although most people who are still steeped in this cult, people that we know are good people with good intentions, you are told again and again that doubts or listening to contrary opinions or researching critics' claims against this man or questioning God would diminish your faith. And so getting out from this is easier said than done. And I truly believe that it was God's grace that my husband and I, finally did escape the delusion. I'm sure we'll get into it more later, but
Yeah.
hopefully that gives you a good picture of my early upbringing.
Yeah, so you were formed in the Satya Sai Baba group, whatever teachings he had. So as a teenager, you
Yeah,
grew up with this kind of a formation. So then from Malaysia,
yeah,
you went to do your studies in America. So from a Hindu
yeah,
formation, you are entering a Christian country. At least the Christian culture is
yeah.
very prevalent in America. So what were the changes in perspective that you had, or you were still sticking to your formation as a Hindu?
So I think coming to the US was rather uneventful spiritually, if I'm being completely honest. For when I arrived in San Francisco, which is a very, very secular part of the
Yeah,
country,
yeah.
and also the Bay Area has a large Indian population, a large Hindu population. There are, I think, don't quote me on this because I don't remember the exact number, but I think there's like 10 or 11 Satya Sai Baba centers just in the Bay Area alone.
Whoa.
And over 300 plus devotees. And so it was not particularly a shock to my system or a big change in that regard. I'd also traveled to the US fairly often growing up. I have family in California and New Jersey. And so um, America culturally was not unfamiliar territory for me. So I don't think it really, I don't think it changed very much for me spiritually. I mean, it took me 14 years in the US um, to finally have, a spiritual awakening. And that had more to do with my husband and I than I think it had to do with where we were.
So even after coming to America to do your studies, you were still like living with the Satya Sai Baba formation. Did your Christian friends not kind of, or the way they lived and practiced their Christian faith, not challenge you to look the other way?
So I don't think necessarily. So a lot of I went to art school in San Francisco where a lot of my friends were secular or had secular
Mm,
backgrounds.
mm,
I didn't have a lot of heavily Christian influences in my life, even in college or in school.
mm,
And so I don't think that really did play much of a role. But also, I would say the 4 years when I was going through college, I kind of removed myself from the Satya Sai Baba organization per se. I still did like my own, I guess, personal prayers, you could
mm,
call it, but
mm,
because I was so busy with school and I had other things going on, I was not as inclined to, immediately look for a Satya Sai Baba center or anything like that.
mm,
Um, it was really after college that, when I started working and when I was no longer in like the school environment, that I think I started to seek out what I believed was God at the time, just maybe for my own comfort or for my own solace. And that's when I found the Satya Sai Baba community in California,
mm,
and found a center and started participating more actively.
mm,
But until I graduated school, I really, the 4 years of college were, I think, a period of just like secularism for me, if I'm being completely honest. I
mm,
was I was nominally praying, but
mm.
it wasn't a big part of my life for
Ac-
4 years.
And we forgot to talk about your when you studied in a Catholic school when you were in Malaysia. So that gave you
Yeah.
a perspective into the Catholic faith. So can you
Yeah.
share briefly about that, and then we'll go on to your rest of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to a Catholic girls' school from fifth through 10th grade, so most of my formative years. And I did have Catholic friends growing up, both in school, just in my neighborhood. I went to Mass growing up, but just as an observer.
Mm,
I'd go Christmas caroling every year with our local church group. So Catholicism was a part of my life, but it was very much in the periphery because the Hindu influences and the influences from the Satya Sai Baba organization were so strong and took center stage.
mm,
But I will very quickly talk about one very influential Catholic figure for me that I think in retrospect really left an impression on me.
mm,
And that was Sister Enda Ryan. She was the founder of my school.
mm,
She was part of the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary.
mm,
And she founded Asunta Secondary School in Malaysia in the late 1950s. She
mm,
had retired by the time I was in school,
mm,
but she often visited, she spoke, she played a very influential role
mm,
on the culture of sisterhood at our school. And she lit up every time she spoke, every time she sang our school song. She always put God at the center of everything. One of the verses of our school song was, God bless our school. Let your truth and love found herein affect our lives day by day and keep the future free from sin.
mm,
And this is one of the verses that I have kept in memory all my life, and I think it definitely left an impression on me. Our school motto was Ad Veritatem Per Caritatem, which is Latin for to truth through charity.
mm,
Um, and this also kind of left a very, I think, lasting impression on me because it was such a big part of the culture of the school. And I didn't necessarily understand or appreciate how that was forming my worldview or how it changed who I was on the inside. But Sister Enda was a living example of what I would say it means to rejoice in the Lord. She was just so joyful and so happy all the time. And if we talk about, being living examples of Christ and evangelizing just through our example alone, she was such a
mm.
beautiful testament to that, and I think definitely influenced me in a big way.
Mm. So now moving on to your love life of finding your husband, Shana. So how did you guys meet? And so Dhruv was also a Hindu, isn't it? He was not a Christian when you guys met.
Yeah. Yeah, he was also a Hindu. We actually met through the Satya Sai Baba organization. So he was also a Satya Sai Baba devotee.
Mm,
And our faith in Satya Sai Baba, I think, did play a big role in our relationship, especially at the beginning of our relationship. Neither of
mm,
us had ever dated somebody with the same religious beliefs. And I think we found comfort in that.
Mm.
We participated in the center's devotional activities together. We prayed together. We read Hindu literature together. We read
Mm.
Satya Sai Baba's books together. And anytime we had questions, we sought counsel from each other, albeit misguided counsel, now
Yeah.
that we understand better. Um, but the one thing about the Satya Sai Baba organization that I think is important to our relationship as well is that it was very taboo to question any of his teachings in any way. On the surface, it seemed like they encouraged discussions with what they called study circles,
Mm.
but there was an air of judgment, and raising doubts or questioning the fundamentals of what he preached was not looked upon kindly.
Mm.
So, for example, if I had brought up the question of meat eating,
Mm.
I would have been judged very harshly by other devotees. And I know folks who, would eat meat in secret because they were concerned about how other devotees would react if they find out. So growing up, my husband and we were told not to look at anything negative written about Satya Sai Baba, not to question his teachings,
Mm.
not to read any of his critics' claims because it would diminish our faith.
Mm.
Reason and faith were not congruous in this sense. And I think what we both found was a solace in being able to talk to each other openly, to speak very candidly, to ask questions of each other without being judged from the very beginning. And
Mm.
even when we still believed in this man, I think that um, set us apart a little bit from the majority of devotees because we wanted to have deeper conversations. We wanted answers. We were not always satisfied by what we were told. And
Mm.
I think that openness and hunger eventually led to where we are today.
Mm.
Another good example of this are these concepts of karma and astrology.
Yeah.
Karma was a big thing that Satya Sai Baba preached, and it's a big concept in Hinduism, right? This
Mm.
idea that every action has a reaction or consequence that may not only bear its fruit or punishment in this lifetime, but in the next lifetime that, I may come back as a dog or a fish, who knows, because of something that I did in this lifetime. And astrology is very linked to that. It's this idea that our lives are predestined based on this karmic cycle. So we have very little, if any, free will. The idea that the idea was basically that we're effectively here to settle the score. I mean,
Mm.
Satya Sai Baba preached that karma was the very reason for birth,
Mm.
that the only way to escape the cycle of birth and death and lifetime to lifetime was to rid yourself of your karma and rid yourself of your attachments, and that included your spouse, your children, your family. And my husband and I always had doubts about this, but neither of us could speak about this very openly with anybody else. But it's something that we always talked about, that astrology seemed a little loopy to both of us, that it didn't
Mm.
make sense if somebody is claiming to be God, or if God is omniscient and God is omnipresent and God is all knowing and all of these things, then how is it that we're trapped in this law of karma? How is it that astrology somehow determines the course of our lives?
Mm.
So we had a lot of these questions, and I think it bonded us, but um, it gave us a lot of anxiety as well because there was discord between our reason and what we were told to believe and our hearts at the time. And it truly was a form of oppression. And God is not oppressive, but it was in exploring conversations with each other that we finally came to our own conclusions and finally found the Catholic faith, I think,
Mm.
in our lives. But it's so central to our relationship. Not only, the Satya Sai Baba organization as a beginning, but um, the brainwashing that takes place and how the two of us were only able to find that solace in conversation with each other that we couldn't find in the organization.
Mm. So you and Adru get married. Then during your first pregnancy, something happened. That's when the whole
Yeah,
journey started. Towards the Catholic faith. You wouldn't you say?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
So could you
yeah,
share about?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, So, with my first pregnancy, I faced a complication at 13 weeks. So, I started bleeding profusely on a Friday night. I thought I was having a miscarriage. I was, crying buckets of tears. I was just ridden with anxiety.
Mm.
We called the hospital at the time. The OBGYN said, we just have to wait it out and see if the bleeding subsides. And I'll call you back on Monday to see how you're doing.
Mm.
And that left both my husband and I in the dark.
Mm.
And at the time, we remembered that a friend of ours had given the number of a local midwife. So 11 p.m. on a Friday night, it was a long shot, but we needed some guidance. We needed to use some answers. And so we gave her a call.
Mm.
She picked up, she spoke to me for half an hour. She went through every possible questions that I wouldn't have known to ask, walking me through all the possible scenarios. And anyway, long story short, she ended up seeing me that Monday. We did an ultrasound to confirm it wasn't a miscarriage. It was a subchorionic hemorrhage, which is a clot that forms between the amniotic sac and the uterine wall. So that was what was causing the bleeding.
Mm.
But in this conversation with her, after the ultrasound, she talked to me about nutrition in my pregnancy. And one of the major things that she talked about was making sure that I was getting enough iron because I was also anemic.
Mm.
And we had mentioned at the time we were vegetarians. So she very courteously made some suggestions on how I could supplement my diet, but then she later sent resources on animal-based pregnancy and supporting pregnancy with protein-rich foods and eating a steak every now and then might be good for you.
Mm.
But I wasn't quite ready to stop being vegetarian. I think because of the the brainwashing and this internal feeling that had been so heavily steeped in me, which is this was a form of violence.
Mm.
So I did supplement, and my son was born healthy, thank God. But my placenta, when my first son was born, was calcified.
Mm.
And for those who don't know what that means, it basically has a very rough texture to it. Um, Almost like little stones on the surface of my placenta. And my midwife immediately asked me if I had smoked during my pregnancy. And I said I'd never smoked in my entire life, let alone in pregnancy. Um, but we learned that the calcification could have been a result of lack of nutrition because of my vegetarian diet, and later learned that this was a common occurrence in vegetarian and vegan pregnancies. And this was the beginning, unlikely beginning of our journey into Catholicism.
Mm.
Um, so after my first son was born and that whole experience, my husband and I began to do more research on
Yeah.
animal-based diets, the keto diet, carnivore diet. And we found folks like Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Paul Saladino, Mahek Lokanwala, many others who started to shift our views on vegetarianism.
Mm.
My husband actually went back to eating meat just 12 days after my first son was born because he needed the energy.
Yeah.
Um, I did a home birth, and aside from my midwife, it was just the two of us caring for a new baby. And my husband took on a lot: household chores, making sure I was fed, caring for me postpartum, helping
Mm.
me with the baby when I needed to take a shower, those types of things.
Mm.
And so he needed the energy, and I was very encouraging and supportive of him reincorporating meat in his diet because it seemed to make him feel better. But I think I was still hesitant to move away from vegetarianism.
Mm.
But we were doing all this research at the time that showed how beneficial meat eating was. And I
Mm.
couldn't shake that internal discord between
Mm.
reality and this teaching that Sai Baba said that meat eating was not only a form of violence, but that it was no better than being a demon. And I think just one more thing, he also had said in a talk that um, there was a talk, and I think it was the opening of a cardiology institute in India, or a cardiology institute by the Sai organization. I don't remember the exact detail of that. But in the talk, he said that all heart health issues are due to the consumption of meat and
Mm.
animal fat.
Wow.
And my husband and I actually watched this clip on YouTube together, and I looked at him and I said, how do we reconcile that with all this research we've done, everything that we know to be true in our lives right now, that you are feeling incredible, that it's so at odds with our reality? It just doesn't make any sense. And that internal discord just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And the more research we did, the more the evidence was undeniable.
Mm.
And so then that, you know, led to us uncovering a lot of other lies.
So you still had not started eating the meat, and then it's only during your
Yeah.
second pregnancy that you said, "Okay, I'm going to rethink my whole decision about eating only vegetarian," isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when my first son was 8 months old, we found out I was pregnant again.
Mm,
And by this time, we had done so much research. And in particular, I had watched a documentary called Nourished,
mm,
in which they compared the placentas of an animal based mother and a vegetarian mother.
mm,
And the vegetarian mother's placenta was very similar to mine from my first birth. It was calcified, it was rough. And so, although I was still dealing with this internal discord, I felt like I need to do what's best for my child and I need to do what's best for my pregnancy this time.
mm.
And so then I, though hesitantly, started to incorporate meat in my second pregnancy. And sure enough, it was, so much smoother, no complications. I
Mm,
was running around with my 1-year-old, throwing him up in the air. I had a lot of energy.
mm.
Um,
So
and then when
Shana,
my
just
second
want
son was
to
born,
sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. So when you say discord, right?
yeah,
So what was the discord that was going through in your mind based on your research and what
yeah.
you had been brainwashed with?
The discord was really the mental and the emotional, or like the reason, like my rationality and my heart. um my heart was still stuck on this teaching that I had been, raised in, effectively, that meat eating was evil, that it was a form of violence, um that it was no better than being a demon. And then also that, like I said, in that discourse, he mentioned that, the cause of all heart health issues had to do with meat and
Mm,
animal fat. And that was so at discord with reality of what was happening in our lives and all the evidence that we had found. And so, to me, it was like, this doesn't make any sense. And if this truly is God, and if this guy is saying he's God, and God is truth, and God is supposed to be truth, and this is supposed to be the truth, but this is not, like, it doesn't make any sense. I think
mm,
that's the discord that I was dealing with.
mm,
And it was the same thing that my husband was dealing with.
mm,
When I had asked looked at my husband and said, "How do you reconcile this?" He said, you
mm,
can't reconcile this. There's no reconciling." And so we almost looked at each other with this, like, where do we go from here look. And he continued. My husband is a researcher and a scientist, and so he continued to kind of go down these rabbit holes of research
mm,
and diving deeper and deeper and deeper into this. And in July last year, when my second son was born,
mm,
my husband finally said to himself, like, none of this makes any sense, and I need to look into all of this, and I need to look into Satya Sai Baba. I need to look at all the things that we were told never to look at.
mm,
um and I remember sitting on the couch with him and him just telling me this. He was like, I'm gonna start looking at all the things we were told never to look at about Satya Sai Baba. um and after uncovering this first lie, that meat eating is a fundamental evil, it was unbelievable the things that we began to uncover about Satya Sai Baba and all these things that we were told not to look at.
mm,
In particular, we found a discourse that he had given on Christmas Day 1996, in which he made some of the most ludicrous, historically inaccurate claims I have ever heard. He said things like, and I'm quoting, I wrote this down for the interview.
mm.
He said, 350 years BC, Jews lived. However, among Jews, there were religions such as Islam and Christianity. He
Whoa.
also claimed that Christianity preceded Christ by 350 years, which I don't even know how you reconcile that one logically or historically. And then there were other claims in that same talk that Romans on one side and Catholics on the other and Luther on the other side, these are his words, attempted to harm Jesus. And not only are these historically accurate, they're wildly different timelines.
Yeah.
And so there were so many blatantly false claims that just didn't make any sense. It was laughable. And
Mm,
when my husband and I watched that together, we thought to ourselves, like, how could we have been so stupid? Like, how could you not, like, just, and these are things that the organization has intentionally tried to conceal. There is a book series called Satyasai Speaks, where they purportedly document all of his discourses, his talks that he had given over his lifetime, and this particular talk was intentionally removed from that series. So it's not there to be found in that series. We found the YouTube on video on sorry, we found the video on YouTube of the discourse that was actually shared by a critic. And then beyond that, we found a plethora of accusations of sexual abuse against young men that had happened over the course of decades.
Mm,
Uh, Legally sworn affidavits that were submitted to embassies of various different countries. There's a BBC documentary called The Secret Swami that documents the experience of one particular family. And to watch a mother cry over what happened to her son,
mm,
and you could see in her eyes that she felt like, how could I have done this? Or,
mm,
this was because of me. It was so disturbing and so difficult for us. It truly, like, it of Satya Sai Baba, it transformed us very quickly.
mm,
And we were disturbed, disgusted, but frankly, we were ashamed. I think the both of us were ashamed, and we felt very silly. But like I said, the brainwashing is it runs so deep that sometimes, to look at it in retrospect and say, "Oh, you're so stupid for believing
mm,
this." It's easy to say,
mm,
but coming out of it, there was a lot of torment. I truly felt torment at the idea that I ever had any involvement with this organization.
mm,
Even after removing all the pictures of this man in our home, every so often, my husband and I, for a month or two, would find like some rolled up photo somewhere or something in a drawer, and it really troubled us. Like, we would like rush to like get rid of it because it was like so tormenting that was any part of our lives.
mm.
But this began our question for, or our search for truth.
Mm. So, as we go into your journey into the Catholic faith, I just want to play a devil's advocate a little bit, Shana. So, even if Sai Baba
Yeah,
was making wrong historical claims, or even if he was involved in sexual abuse, let's say that is true, that does not
yeah,
disqualify his truth claim about Hinduism, or the fact that he says eating non-vegetarian is a fundamental evil. That is a truth claim. So that has no association with
yeah,
who he is as a person. It could still be true that he's telling the
yeah,
truth, but he's this kind of a
yeah.
bad person. So how did you kind of digest that aspect?
I think so. For us, there was um a lot of further study, I would say. We started to explore various different denominations of Christianity. We looked at the prospect of atheism or even agnosticism.
Mm,
We were looking at all these different possible avenues for truth. We didn't know what the truth was.
mm,
Um, and as we look through all of it, one of the things that I went back to, because of my formation in a Catholic school, and then also for many years, I had followed a number of Catholic podcasters and commentators on YouTube. I just had a predilection for doing this. I
mm,
enjoyed listening to Catholic commentary and discourse.
mm.
So I listen to Michael Knowles almost daily, although I know he talks more about politics, but Catholicism informs a lot of his worldview and a lot of
Yes.
what he talks about.
Mm,
And I've listened to him almost daily for 5 years.
mm,
There are very few days that I miss the Michael Knowles show.
mm,
I was listening to Pints with Aquinas with Matt Fradd. I had listened to Father Mike Schmitz in various different videos, some of his talks at Seek. I was listening to Lila Rose quite a bit. And so I had, uh, I would say, certain ideas or the seeds of ideas planted in my mind. And um, one of the things that my husband and I started to listen to was the Bible in the Year podcast by Father Mike Schmitz and the Catechism in a Year podcast by Father Mike Schmitz. And this just happened to be a conversation that my husband and I had, because he was going down every theological rabbit hole he could
mm. Ah,
possibly go down, trying to figure out what the truth was. And my instinct was, let me look into Catholicism a little bit more, because this is something that I've always had some inherent attraction to. And I wanted to dive deeper. So I said, just listen to one episode with me.
Mm.
Um, and if you like it, we can continue. Otherwise, I'll listen to it on my own. But he enjoyed it so much,
Mm.
and we enjoy listening to Father Mike Schmitz. And um, in one of the episodes of Bible in the Year, Father Mike Schmitz was going through Genesis and talked about the creation about creation, and how um, I'm paraphrasing because I'm not using the exact verse, but that all of this creation,
Mm.
animals, trees, nature, all of that, it is created for the benefit of
Yeah.
mankind, and that we are at the center of this. And I think hearing that, and then subsequently my husband and I having conversations about that, gave us so much peace. And it was congruent with our reality. It was congruent with what we were living. It made sense.
Mm.
Um, it made sense that if all of creation is there
Mm.
in service of mankind, so that mankind can find our way back to God, then that it makes sense that, eating meat is not necessarily a fundamental evil. It's
Yes.
not a fundamental evil.
Yes.
That it would serve my body in a way that is beneficial to me, and that scientific benefit, or that health benefit, is not incongruent with the morality
Yeah.
of whether I choose to eat meat or not. And so I think that's where we started to find some alignment.
Mm.
And then the further we went together into the catechism, into Catholic theology, the more we felt this
Mm.
about various different topics. Marriage in particular was a big one. In Hinduism, like I said, this concept of karma, that you're ridding yourself of all your karma, that includes your spouse, it includes your children, it includes your family.
When you
And
say include, what do
I
you
always,
mean, Shana? You say karma.
I mean
Mm.
that in order to achieve God
Mm.
in Hinduism,
Mm.
that you have to rid yourself of all your attachments, all the things that are binding you to your karma. And
Mm.
those things include the people in your life.
So you have to get rid
So
of
if
them?
my husband and I,
Mm. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, effectively,
Mm.
effectively, you have to, meditate your life away on a mountain and rid yourself of all these attachments, and that is how you reach God. That's the fundamental idea, right?
Mm.
And so I struggled with this a lot in
Mm.
the early years of our marriage. I used to
Mm.
have conversations with my husband and say, like, will you leave me one day, because, like, to pursue God,
Ka-
because I'm not there yet. I'm not ready yet. Like, it was this really gave me it was such a source of anxiety,
Yeah.
honestly. And coming into Catholicism fully and learning what the church teaches about marriage, and that we are not only not supposed to get rid of each other, but that this is covenant, that
Yeah.
this reflects the covenant of God,
Mm.
and that we are in big ways responsible for each other's salvation, and that we bring each other into heaven together.
Yeah.
This strengthened our marriage in an incredible way.
Yes.
It changed our marriage in an incredible way, and it's just another example of, a truth that we found in the church that was congruent with the life that we envisioned for ourselves, congruent with our reality, congruent with what a loving God would say,
Mm.
if you believe that God is love, and if you believe that God is truth. um and we started the OCIA program in September last year. We
Oh,
actually arrived
Shana,
at the
before
doorstep
you
of the
go
church.
there, I sorry.
Yeah,
Before we go to the OCI program, I just want to share. So, I want you to share
yeah.
what was the conviction that you arrived at that eventually made you take that step towards OCI? Like, what was it a coming together of many things that you guys had researched and believe, being discovering the truth, or
Yeah.
was it just one thing and you said, okay, this is it?
No, I don't think there was one particular thing. It was just a collection of
Mm,
various different ideas.
mm,
Marriage in particular was a big one.
mm,
And then just as we went through Father Mike Schmidt's catechism in a year, we were going through like 3 or 4 episodes a day just in the car together, and we would talk about it. And as we went through it more and more, we both said, like, this feels right. It
mm,
sounds like the truth. And my husband being, you know, a scientist and like somebody who rationalizes everything or has to rationalize everything, this was the first time that for him, reason, faith, God, like everything was all just coming together in such a beautiful way.
mm,
Um, and and for me, it just made sense.
mm,
And I think looking back, maybe that is what attracted me to a lot of Catholic podcasts and content as well, because it always just made sense. Like
mm.
there was always something congruent, and there was a congruence between heart and mind
Oh.
anytime I listened to any conversation about Catholicism. Um, and then OCIA just kind of took that another step further and helped us dive even deeper. So
Mm.
um, I can go into
Yeah,
OCIA, or I'll stop
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah,
OCIA. So eventually, you guys were convinced, and you said, "Okay, you're going to take the step to get to know more about the Catholic faith, and eventually be baptized
yeah,
in the church." So, so the
yeah.
formation was. Would you say that OCI formation contributed a lot for you to better understand the faith?
Yeah, I think OCIA played a very big role for us. We actually, so neither of us knew about OCIA per se.
Mm,
We just kind of stepped foot at a Catholic church and wanted to talk to somebody. So we went
mm,
to the office and
mm,
we asked about, about what the process is to get baptized in the Catholic Church. And
mm.
it was by God's grace, because we arrived at the doorstep of a Catholic church literally a week before the first OCIA class.
Wow.
Um, and so when we got to the church, the St. Mary Star of the Sea in Vermont, is the church where that we went to,
Oh, but you guys are in New
and
Jersey, right? You went all the way to Vermont,
we're in New Hampshire.
New
Yeah, we're
Hampshire.
in New Hampshire. So um, it's about an hour away. We were actually driving back from Montreal. We had done a small like family trip to
Okay,
Montreal,
okay.
and St. Mary's Star of the Sea was on the way. We looked at the schedule, and we saw that there was a mass happening, and so we decided to stop
Ah,
there on the way back to New Hampshire.
ah,
Um, but then later, because we live in such a rural town in New Hampshire,
mm,
when we went to our local Catholic church, which we now attend regularly, um, they did not have an OCIA program because there were just not enough people to fill the
yeah.
program, and so we ended up going back to St. Mary every week for OCIA. But when we got to St. Mary, we ended up being able to talk to the priest there, and he talked to us about OCIA, and this is the process, and gave us a schedule, and classes start next week, and this is the registration process, and so on and so forth. And so it all happened very quickly. We like registered, we like signed up, and then OCIA started the following week.
So you almost
Um,
crossed state borders to get formed in the Catholic faith,
yeah, we
isn't it?
did. We did. Yeah, we crossed state borders every week to
Yeah.
enter the Catholic faith.
Uh,
So we had OCIA classes every week, with just like a couple exceptions between September and April. Which so we got baptized at Easter Vigil.
mm,
Um, but OCIA was a phenomenal experience. It was so different than what we had both lived for so long. We were encouraged to ask every
mm,
question.
mm.
In fact, our OCIA teacher said, "Ask the questions that you like. Ask even the most difficult questions.
Yeah.
Ask the questions that you don't feel like you want to ask, or you wouldn't
Mm.
want to ask because it might be embarrassing or whatever." But in that first class, he said, like, ask every question,
Wow.
examine everything, investigate
Mm.
everything, because it should be that you, by your own will and by coming to your own conclusions, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, that you truly want to enter the Catholic faith.
Yes.
That this is not just a nominal thing. And one of the things that he taught, um, I forget where exactly this is written, but this idea that faith and reason are the two wings on which the human spirit rises to the
Wow.
contemplation of
I
their
was
grace.
just searching
That
that to tell you about that quote after
that
you finished sharing this. That's said by St. John Paul II.
Yeah, and
Complete the
that was
quote.
one of the first things that we learned in OCIA before even getting into biblical teaching or learning about the catechism or the mass or anything. This was the first thing that we learned, and it was incredible because our prior faith in Satya Sai Baba was synonymous with feeling. It was attached to these so-called experiences, familial ties, stories that were passed down, but it was devoid of reason because we were told not to question. At its
Mm,
core was this teaching to divorce yourself from reason altogether, to
yes.
just have faith. That faith and reason are two separate things altogether. If Sai Baba said 1 + 1 is 3, that was the truth, and you would have to find a way to justify that being so.
Mm.
In fact, a good example of that is he, during his lifetime, always said that he would die at 96, that he is God, and he knows he knew that he would die at 96, but he died at 84. And when he passed, the mental gymnastics that happened in the organization among devotees to
Yeah.
justify this, to say that, oh, in the lunar calendar, by this astrological calculation or something, he is actually 96, even though he was 84. It just, there's so much mental gymnastics, and this is it's illustrative of the divorcing between faith and reason.
Mm.
um and to make that kind of faith possible, you had to suspend all reason and rational judgment,
Mm.
because you had to put your faith in this idea that, oh, this is God, and because God says this, it must be so, even if it doesn't make any sense or
Mm.
concur with my reality in any way.
I mean,
And Catholicism is
so
entirely contrary to that.
because as Catholics, we wouldn't call that faith because anything that you're asked to believe without the support of reason is not faith anymore. It's just a very low level
Right,
superstitious practice. So, so,
right.
so once you came into the fold of the church, Shana, and you found the what do you say, the harmony between faith and reason, there should have been such a
Yeah,
peace that engulfed you and Dhruv and your marriage and
yeah,
your family, right?
yeah. I cannot describe the peace,
Mm.
because suddenly everything, like I said earlier, everything made sense. Everything started to be in alignment, everything down to little things. One of the things that was very taboo to talk about in Hindu culture, and then in the Satya Sai Baba organization as
Mm.
well,
Mm.
is your intimate life with your spouse. That's not something that's any kind of discussion is ever encouraged around, and it's such a taboo topic. And so we never really explored it in the context of faith. But
Mm.
the church's teaching on your intimate life is so
Unbelievable.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, after listening to a few episodes and like reading the catechism with regard to this,
Mm.
we talked to each other, and like we both had this peace in our marriage, but also there was this, I don't know if it's regret or feeling like we wished that we had known this sooner, because we
Yeah.
would have made so many less mistakes in
Mm.
our former lives,
Mm.
in our relationships, in the way that we thought about marriage, in the way that we thought about dating.
Mm.
um, but we also talked about what a gift it is for our children to be raised in the Catholic faith, and to have um,
Mm.
every answer they could be looking for,
Absolutely. And the church is not,
and
yeah,
incredible peace.
afraid to say on aspects that the church is not sure or it doesn't know. The church says we don't know. It doesn't try to do the mental
Yeah,
gymnastics like some of the other religions do to
right.
kind of give explanation to everything.
Yeah,
Mm.
right.
So
Yeah,
just to
yeah.
give the
No,
quote,
absolutely.
the quote that you were saying, Shana, faith and reason are like the two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And this was said by Saint Pope John Paul II.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. I was forgetting where the quote came from, but I remember that being like, the first thing that we learned in OCIA,
Mm, mm,
because it was so contrary to the faith in which we were raised.
mm.
Um, it,
And if
you know,
I,
the
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I
No,
was
go ahead.
about to ask you, like, there are so many intelligent and very smart people who are Hindus who are, like, become victim to the cult of Satya Sai Baba, even in America, like where people are
Yeah.
generally trying to understand everything about the world and life. So what would you tell them, Shana, like, based on your experience, if you have to give them a gateway to at least explore and research the truth, what would you tell them?
Um I read a beautiful article on Word on Fire just yesterday, actually. It's from last year, but I had just read it yesterday. And it's written by John Shute, called Reclaiming Faith and Reason,
Mm,
in which he wrote that public discourse has been reduced to a false choice between faith, which is taken to mean blind acceptance or arbitrary propositions,
yeah.
and reason is taken to mean impeccable values, but that faith and reason do not contradict each other at all.
Mm,
Without faith in the good and instead in a false god, be it race or socioeconomic status or a literal false god like Satya Sai Baba, one can be purportedly reasonable in their choices, but
mm,
without reason, faith becomes an excuse not to progress in our understanding of everything: science, government, culture.
yeah.
So by reaffirming both faith and reason, we can fulfill our purpose. And that summed it up so beautifully for me. And I think that is at the core of the advice, or what I would say to anybody who is still in this cult, or still deluded by this, is just look at your reality. Look
Mm,
at your own reality, and just begin the process of questioning, because if you do that, um, even without looking at any kind of, Catholic theology, or looking at the Bible, or looking at,
mm,
really anything else, but your
mm,
own reality, just look at your own reality and
mm,
what you're being taught.
mm,
Um, and start to try to align those two things, and you will find a lot of incongruence.
mm,
And if you truly believe that God is truth, um, and if you truly believe that God should be truth, with no exception, really, and that God is the reason for our universe, for our existence, for all of that, then God cannot be contradictory to reason, because reason is the very basis for all existence.
mm,
And so just to just look outside the brainwashing, look outside what you're being taught, and look at your own reality first and examine that. And then, that will lead you down a path. I mean, for us, it just started with vegetarianism and reincorporating meat into our diets,
mm,
and that's where God found us. Um, and it led to so much more. It led to so much more. It led to us finding so many different lies. It led to us finding our way to the Catholic Church. And it led us to a much stronger marriage with each other as well. So, um, if you can just look at your own reality, I think that's a good starting place for, discovering the truth.
mm. I think any religion or institution or any establishment which says that you cannot ask questions and you just have to blindly accept whatever they say is always a dangerous place to be in. And I know so many
Yeah.
people who are working in the Bay Area, they use their reason and intellectual ability to create so many things. And I think they should just
Yeah.
open their mind to explore these things without having to immediately convert or anything of that sort. Just explore.
Yeah, there's another beautiful anecdote that my husband shared with me from a book that he's reading,
Mm,
in which a college professor in India, he's a Christian professor, and he goes to these various schools and he talks to them about faith and about other topics. And one of the things that came up was he was talking to a group of students and saying, you use your reason to solve some of the most complex scientific and technological problems.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, you are using your reason and intellectual capacity. But then on the other hand, your religion tells you that 1 + 1 is 3. I don't remember the exact example that he used, but Hinduism has uh a lot of rituals that don't make a whole lot of sense. There's, bathing an idol carved in stone in milk or in water, or doing these things that on the surface don't really make a whole lot of sense, but you are told that this is a form of worship, or that this is God, or that this is how God wants to be worshipped, and so on. Um, and so he said, you're on the one hand, you're using such deep reasoning to solve all these problems. And on the other hand, you believe XYZ, and you are engaging in these rituals, and you're doing this, and you're letting people tell you that this is true.
Mm.
How can both things be true at the same time?
Yeah.
How can your beliefs on this side in regards to science and technology, and the way that you are deducing the answers to problems, and then all of this that you believe in your faith, how can those two things be congruent or be true at the same time? They're so contradictory to each other in their nature. And this was the basis for him kind of talking about a lot of other social and cultural issues in India, which I won't get into, but it it was very interesting, because it again, it lends itself to this like what you're saying. In Silicon Valley, you have a lot of Hindus who are ostensibly brilliant people
Yeah.
doing incredible work in terms of technology and science, but people who still engage in uh rituals that make absolutely no sense, and a religion that does not really give you um reasonable answers to larger questions about life. And so um it is so interesting, because like I said, to be part of that, you really do have to suspend your reason. And I know what that's like, because my husband and I both were in it for so long,
Mm.
and had to um have faith outside of reason for so long, to even make our way
Mm.
in the cult, and to even um have a relationship with what we believed to be
To be
God.
God. Yeah.
um
Mm.
but it's so liberating to be on the other side of it. There's so much peace. I joke with my husband that it's nice to know that I won't be coming back in another life as a fish
Yeah.
or something.
And that you have to get rid of him in this life too. You don't have to
Yeah,
do that either.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I can keep him to myself in this
Yeah.
life.
So,
Yeah.
Shana, it's 1 hour. So, I think we have covered so many topics. I think we can keep talking about your experience in so many different angles. But thank you for sharing. I wish this interview becomes a blessing for many people.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to have the conversation, and thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you. Shana, stay online. I'm just ending the link.